Hey everyone, welcome back to the lab. In this video, we're going to be talking about how to build a full stack web app with F#. So I like to build side projects, and F# is my favorite programming language, so I end up building a lot of projects with F#. I also like to share my creations as a way to crystallize my knowledge and get feedback from the broader community. Together, this means I build a lot of projects and share a lot of things about F#. So I was surprised when I got messages asking me for tutorials on how to build full stack web apps with F#. I already do this, I thought. But then I realized that while I've covered a lot of domains over the years, it's all kind of scattered about and kind of one-off deep dives. There is no one-stop shop to help you go from zero to production web app. And the closest thing I have right now is really the guide section of Cloudseed, my F# project boilerplate, which you can find here at cloudseed.xyz. So in this post, I'm going to create a paved road for going from no app to a working full stack web app built with F#. This is more of a run book than a detailed technical guide. It will walk through the high-level decisions you need to make, provide some suggestions, and then point you to the more detailed guides that already exist for implementation based on those decisions. And so really there's 5 sections that we're going to be going over. The first one is why build web apps with F#, so why you should consider using F# to build your next web app. Second is choosing a system design, my thoughts on system designs from a high level and how that's going to affect your tech choices and really the overall structure of your web app. Build a backend with F#, how to build a solid core for your app logic, how to build a front end, and provide ways to interact with that F# backend. And finally, some real world examples to give you some inspiration, some different methods and paradigms of how this kind of looks in production. All right, let's start off with why build web apps with F#. So I like F# because it feels like a language that has learned from the mistakes of others. It tries to be simple while providing tools to be correct. It tries to push you into the pit of success while allowing you to do less correct things should you need to. It tries new, better ways of doing things while still interoperating with existing ecosystems. All in all, it feels like a language that is trying to be better, even if that's different from the way other languages do things. In many ways, it feels like it's striving and largely succeeding at being what a modern language should be, taking the lessons from the last 50 years of programming and making a language to solve for those. To me, it's kind of like a nice pen or a keyboard or a rain jacket. You know, there are other ones out there, but this one is better in many, many ways. Not everyone will appreciate these things, but I do, and so that's why I choose F#. And now for some concrete kind of things that I like about F# that I think it does way better than many other options out there, here's probably the top 3. So the first is the type system. So its type system is powerful, concise, and precise. And so a lot of people love Rust for its type system. It basically gives you all of that without kind of the boilerplate and the kind of tediousness of borrow checking and stuff like that. And if you've ever used TypeScript, it's very similar to TypeScript, but it lies less. So it doesn't have the problems of, being built on JavaScript and untyped. It's not a linter. No, it is the compiled language that's statically type checking all your stuff. The second reason that it's very ergonomic. So one, just writing it, it almost feels like shorthand, very Pythonic in that regard. But it also gives you very nice utilities, things for piping, list operations, and railroading, which, as you kind of progress in how you program things, you start to realize that these kind of higher order helpers of dealing with things helps a lot because you're doing this stuff over and over and over. And so shorthand for this stuff makes things kind of faster, but also safer and more correct. And finally, I like F# because it's pragmatic. And so I think there's a lot of languages that have these things independently, but maybe they don't really work that well in real systems. So it's you just kind of stay away from those. And so it does this in a few ways. One, it's functional first. So it kind of throws you in that pit of success, but you can always fall back to OO if that's what you're more comfortable with. And there are scenarios where OO honestly just works better, especially when we're dealing with state or stateful objects. Also, this isn't just a random language that theoretically is good, but there's no ecosystem for it. It runs on .NET, so you do get access for basically all of C#'s libraries, and C# is a top 10 language in the world, so you basically get all the libraries you want. You're not kind of sacrificing there. And so together, I think this makes it a very nice package. And I kind of think of it what if there was a language with the simplicity of Python, the type system of Rust or TypeScript, and the performance of Go? And that's kind of what F# is. It kind of takes a lot of the things people love about different languages and packages them all together so you get all of them at once. You don't really have to make that trade-off. Now, if you're still not sold on F#, then this post may not be for you. We are going to be building a web app with F#. But if you're on the fence, I would recommend the Why Use F# series here. from F# for Fun and Profit. It's what convinced me to take my first steps, and I think does a really good job of kind of showing you all the different areas of the language and how that can be useful. I have a lot of related posts on this. So 5 reasons F# is a great Python alternative, why F# is a fun programming language, and how I got interested in F#. Those will be linked here, and I also have video versions of those as well. Okay, the next section will be choosing a system design. So at this point, I'm going to assume that you're at least a little bit interested in building a full stack web app with F#. We'll get there, but first we need a general idea of what you're going to build and how before I can give you more specific recommendations of how to do that. This may seem boring and not useful, but I like the saying, weeks of coding save me hours of planning, and so here I'm going to waste minutes to save you days. Now, I want to be clear that you do not need to plan down to the code logic. I'm just asking you to think about the general structure of your app so that you can set off in a reasonable direction instead of running around in circles. And so my general philosophy for building web apps these days is the HAM stack. And this is a web-first philosophy that provides a rough outline for what most solid web apps look like, pulling from patterns and best practices from my own experience building real-world software and the experience of others at small and large scale for enterprise and side projects. And so the idea of the HAM stack is pretty simple. Really, it's just hypermedia on a monolith. And so hypermedia, I think, is a good option. The reason being that the world is web first and it will continue to be more web as more people get connected and more apps are more interconnected. So there's going to be more data. They're going to be wanting to pull more data from around each other. The internet is the way to do that. So building for the web kind of builds into that future. And yes, devices are cool and native experiences are great, but we are moving towards a world where build once, run anywhere makes more and more sense. I think we are moving to a place where we're going to have really great infrastructure for this interconnectedness. And so really it makes sense for you to focus on something that works well, kind of works everywhere, will be kind of stable for several years, and something that you're not wasting time on one corner of, like, a device or getting kind of platform or vendor lock-in, and that thing could die. The web will not go away. It's the best way we found to get this interconnectedness, to build once, run anywhere, and so I would not bet against the web. Hypermedia lets you kind of invest in that, and I think that's a really good investment. Okay, on a monolith. So the microservices, monolith dichotomy is like a false one. There are other ways to build them, but I still think this gives a good general way of thinking about things and can set you off at least biasing away from failure. And so I think microservices were fun and they can make sense for hyperscale companies, but you just have to realize that you are not a hyperscale company. And if you try to build like a hyperscale company before you hyperscale, you will bury yourself in overhead and never reach hyperscale, or really any scale for that matter, because you're going to be so focused on things like service meshes that you'll never even build an app. So that's just how it works. Moduliths, which are modular monoliths, are really an excellent balance of simplicity, maintainability, and performance. And so I think this makes it a simple, scalable system for building apps, both for side projects, for like startups, for mid-scale companies, and for large-scale companies. You should always, always, always start with a modulith. And then from there, you can break out the modules that are having problems, and you will know when they're having problems and when this makes sense, into its own kind of microservice, or even better, just its own service in general. And then you just have a few kind of moduliths floating around. This is what tends to scale best over various scenarios, large, small, over time, people, performance, loads, etc. So this is my recommendation for doing things. Now note that you can build most web apps with this stack. It is not prescriptive about the tech you choose or most of the structure of your app. This should be very familiar to you if you're into HTMX, the kind of HAL stack, hypermedia on whatever you like. Instead, what this is doing is providing some suggestions, some guardrails, a little bit more precision based on what other people have experienced building, what they found successful, to give you these common patterns so you can try to go in a better direction. And so, for example, all of these following would fit nicely into this philosophy. So you could start with a standard multi-page application using HTML templates. This is how most websites are built even today and have been built in the past. Still works great. You could also build a front end running SvelteKit and a back end running F#. This is what I did for a long time. Many people might build Next.js on the front end instead, or Nuxt, or Vue, etc. This kind of dual modulith approach works pretty good. You can even just serve up, your SPA from the backend if you want. This still works because it's still, in the end, hypermedia on a modulith. And then finally, you might be interested in just server-side rendered HTMX, which, honestly just is a multi-page application that happens to have a little bit more dynamic client-server interaction. This is kind of what I do today, and I found it really fun. But all of these fit in the philosophy, so choose the one that works best for you, and kind of go from there. Now, if you disagree with this philosophy or are trying to build something that does not run on the web, then this guide is probably not for you. If you are still interested, then read on and we'll get you started with F#. For more posts on this, I have the Ham Stack, a deep dive into kind of that philosophy. Cloud Seed Quick Start. This is basically how I get started building full stack F# apps quickly. It's kind of all of these ideas into one implementation that I can just clone and get started building with. And then finally, Software Monoliths for Scale, giving some more examples about how monoliths kind of went out over microservices in real life. All right, so let's build a backend with F#. So regardless of whether you're choosing to build your front end with F# or instead serving it with a separate app or, picking your favorite spa to build with, we are going to need a place to put our core app logic. And since you've, signaled that you want to build with F#, this basically means you need an F# backend no matter which way you go. And now to build a backend with F#, we mostly need two things. The first is a web API. This is going to be a way to receive incoming web requests and respond with data. This will be the core of whatever you build. And then we are also going to need data access, which is just a way to CRUD our data because really any real app doing real things needs data. All right, so building an F# web API. These days, I mostly build my web APIs with Giraffe. There are other good options out there, but I stick with Giraffe because it's solid, it still gets updated, and has a lot of good features. I have several guides for getting started with F# Giraffe. So build a simple F# web API Giraffe here, and then a deeper dive into endpoint routing with F# Giraffe, which gets closer to kind of like how .NET is working. But there are other options out there. I think a lot of them are good. There's a big web frameworks list here, and then I did a survey last year about some of the top ones. A few that I'll call out here are Saturn and Suave. A lot of people seem to like them, and they're usually a little bit like higher level than Giraffe, so this might be more, or you really just care about like simplicity, that might be nice. A lot of people are also dropping down to just using ASP.NET Core's minimal APIs. These work pretty decent, and they've really gotten rid of a lot of the boilerplate, so that could work for you as well. And then one that I've had my eye on for a while is Falco, which to me is kind of like what Giraffe was trying to do, but kind of cuts out a lot of the kind of bloat that's built up over the years and really trying to make it very simple, but also very performant, but also very configurable if that's what you want to do. So if you're new to Giraffe, I would just recommend doing these. For the other ones, there are other guides floating around for those. So go do that, get your thing set up, and then come back. All right, data access with F#. So now you have a way to receive and respond to requests. We're going to need a way to CRUD our data. And you may think this is not important, but I would argue 80% of software engineering is just CRUD and really plumbing CRUD around. So choosing a good method here will make your life easier in the long run. I personally like to use F# with Entity Framework as an ORM because I think it works well for the 80% case. It has great documentation and is always being updated by the C# folks. Entity Framework basically is the solution for data in C#, and so it gets a lot of love, a lot of development. It's always releasing new things, so I think it's really good to piggyback off something like that. Now for migrations, I like to use DBUp. I don't really use Entity Framework migrations, just because I like to have a little bit more control about the state of my data because that really is the core. But for a lot of people, Entity Framework works fine for building its own kind of migrations. So for this, I just have one guide, getting started with F# and Entity Framework. This should get you over the 80% case. That should be good enough for your first web app. There are other ways to access data, again, listed on fsharp.org. I think, from all of these, I would say Dapper F#, or really even just Dapper itself is probably the most popular one. But I've also seen other people playing around with stuff like SQL Hydra and stuff. Personally, I like to stay away from a lot of these F# specific data things because I just don't think that they have the open source support necessary to make sure that these are working well and have all the newest features of like Postgres and MySQL and stuff like that. And so that's one of the downsides of having such a small language is you don't really have the, dozens of open source people who are supporting all of these. And so personally, I like to just use Entity Framework. It works. It's, a little bit clunky because it's built for C#, not F#, but I know it's going to get the latest updates. I know that it won't really have bugs or anything. And so that's why I choose that. All right, so pick the one you like the most and kind of get set up with that. I'm realizing now that if you're just building this, you probably don't even have like a local database set up and stuff. This is one of the reasons why I have Cloud Seed. It containerizes the database and everything with you. So one command, you get, local database, local app, and then the connection set up. I don't have a guide on how to do this, but maybe this is a signal to me that I do need to set that up to kind of make this easier for you. But we can at least do the web request version of this. And so next we're going to build a front end with F#. And so theoretically you have a backend ready to go. and an ability to do data, but as we talked about, unless you have like a local database running, you won't be able to actually use that. But let's say you did. Even if you did, this is really not enough unless you're building an API only thing, but really no like real world app is just an API. There always needs to be a front end of some sort, because even if it's an API, you're probably selling this thing or you need to let people know about this thing. And so therefore you need a front end. And so if you've decided to use something else, that's totally cool. You don't have to use F# to build your front end. You can go find other guides for that. A lot of times I would probably recommend like SvelteKit or Next.js or Nuxt. Use something that's well used, and ideally that you don't have to like plug into your modulith. So I think the dual modulith thing works well for that, because you can keep your concerns separated, and they're very different concerns. But we're not going to cover that here, so go find other guides if that's what you're into. Now, if you did decide to use F#, then there's some things you can try. And there's a lot of different ways to do this, obviously. But ways that I found are pretty good are just standard HTML templates. This will be more similar to like how Django does things, how Ruby does things. Even Razor templates if you're coming from C#. There's a lot of good options here, and I go into that here in type-safe server-side HTML rendering with F# giraffe. Another thing that F# has that's actually better than I've seen it in really any other language is DSL, so domain-specific languages for HTML. One of the reasons that this is so useful is because we get a lot of shorthand functional definitions through F#, and so we can write HTML tags, one, very concisely, but also we get all the safety of the F# language, which helps a lot for making sure what usually is kind of just raw strings, not really type safe or anything HTML, into something that's actually quite correct and consistent. And so if you're into that, you might be interested in server-side HTML rendering with F# and Giraffe.viewEngine. This is how I do things today, and I think it's really, really nice. And then finally, if you're trying to get a little spicy over here, you might be interested in F# into HTMX. And really, HTMX is nothing different than these two. It's really just using these things and adding an additional layer for adding dynamic interactions from the client to server. And so if you use this, you'll probably start with one of these, and then you'll end up adding this kind of extra interaction here with HTMX. And I have a guide right here for that. Now, personally, I've been having a lot of fun with HTML DSLs. I still use Giraffe.viewEngine, building basically multi-page applications, and then I just sprinkle in HTMX where it makes sense. And that's gotten me really far. So I have more related posts on this, like why you should choose HTMX for your next web-based side project, and why I'm moving from SvelteKit to F#. But I do want to preface that like, this is how I like to build. I think there's a lot of other ways to build front ends, especially with F#. We've got things like Fable, which basically allows you to write F# that compiles to JavaScript. And so that opens up a whole world of possibilities, like using React or SvelteKit and stuff, but basically writing stuff in F#. Also Blazor, which is, C#'s answer to WebAssembly, where you can basically write C# and then have it run on the client, and you can kind of get client server interactions that way. That is also an option with F#. I personally don't like these so much, just because I think it's a lot clunkier and there's more things to think about. I like to keep things simple, but those are out there if you're into that, and you can learn more about those elsewhere, as I haven't really done too much with those myself. All right, on to real world examples. So that's the kind of crash course for the things you'll need to do to build your first web app with F#, and a lot of links to explore for how to actually do that. But I understand that like a lot of this might be hard to conceptualize into how it fits together, even though I've given you this paved road, like what does a real app doing all these things actually look like? So I'm going to leave you off with a few examples of apps that do all of these things, so you can kind of see it in its final form. And so I have a lot of these here on the site. A lot of them are linked from my projects page, but here's just 3 of them that I'd recommend. So the first is how I built this site. And so basically this is a markdown blog that's served with F# and Giraffe. And so hopefully this will give you an idea of how to build something that's kind of more like Jamstack. It's kind of more static and stuff. Really, it's just an MPA. Most sites are just MPAs. But this could be a good starting point for you, a good starting project to build. I also have how I host this site. And this site's currently on Google Cloud Run, and it's very cheap, about $1 per month. And I think this will give you more of an idea of how I kind of structure my sites. I like to containerize them. I like to run them serverless, one, so that I don't have to deal with anything, but also so that it's cheap. And then hopefully from there, you can kind of see how you might host something like this to turn your app that you have locally into something that you can actually serve and share with the world. And then finally, you can dive into Travel Map, which is a site that basically lets you plot locations on a map. And so here it is. And it lets you search. So let's try to search New York. And then it found New York, and I can add it on the map, and then it just adds it on the map. This is hosted as a serverless container. This is written with an F# backend. It's building HTMX with Alpine. All of these interactions, these client-only interactions, are built with Alpine, and then I'm using HTMX to kind of do this interactive island for actually doing the searching. And so I have more details about how this is built and stuff like this at this link. Next. All right, so I know this post is a bit of a whirlwind of information, but hopefully it gives you a little bit of direction into the kinds of things you'll need to build and how to learn more about each of them. And then this gives me something I can give to all those people commenting that say, I've never told you how to, build a web app from start to finish. Now, at the end of the day, everyone likes to build things a little bit differently. And so this is just how I like to build things. If you like to build different things, that's okay too. They all have their trade-offs. There really is no best solution. And so this is just how I do them and kind of the paved road that I'm on when I start building my own new app. Now, if you want to get started building a full stack web app with F# quickly, I've compiled all the techniques and technologies that I like to build with and that, I've talked about here in this post into a single boilerplate cloud seed. And this is how I start all of my projects these days. I clone it, I get a ready-made web app with data access and containerization that I can run locally or ship to the cloud and host it there, and then I just start building on it. And this kind of gets rid of like a lot of the, days and weeks of just like plumbing and setting things up and like, oh, why doesn't this work? It just works. And then you can start building from there. So the question for you is like, what kind of things are you trying to build with F# and kind of what patterns have you found useful or even not so useful in building full stack web apps? If you like this post, you might also like the state of F#, my career as a software engineer so far, and what it's like to run HTMX in production, stories from experienced software engineers. That's it for this video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.